In Halifax, there is a specific kind of dampness that exists nowhere else in the world. It's not just humidity. It's a living, breathing entity that comes off the Atlantic, rolling up the harbor like a gray woolen blanket. It gets into the drywall of the old Victorian houses in the South End. It curls the pages of your textbooks, and it settles into your bones until you feel like you re-rusting from the inside out. But the cold I feel now is not related to the weather. It's the cold of subtraction, the temperature of a void. 3 weeks of my life were surgically removed, like bad footage cut from a reel, and no one will tell me who held the scissors. I used to think memory was a library, rows of books you could pull down and reference. Now I know it's just a sandcastle below the high tide line. I am 23 years old. I hold a degree in marine biology from Dalhousie University that I not use because the smell of the ocean now makes me vomit. I am a victim, but if you ask the Halifax Regional Police, I'm a suspect in my own disappearance. To understand the horror, you have to understand the banality that preceded it. You have to understand how boring, how safe, and how incredibly structured my life was before the static took over. October 12th, 2022. It was a Tuesday. I was finishing a shift at the Anchor, a mid-range gastropub on the waterfront that catered to cruise ship tourists in the summer and sad locals in the winter. I remember the date not because it's etched on a police report, but because I had a midterm on the anatomy of cephalopods the next morning at 9:00 a.m., and I was mentally calculating how many hours of sleep I could get if I drove fast. The pub was quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the glass washer behind the bar more clearly than the music. We had the overhead speakers playing a chill lo-fi beats playlist from Spotify, something inoffensive and repetitive. I was wiping down the mahogany bar top with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach and lemon-scented wood polish. I remember the friction of the cloth against the wood, the specific tackiness of a spilled IPA spot that required a little extra elbow grease to remove. Slow night, huh? That was Dave, the shift manager. He was leaning against the pass-through window to the kitchen, scrolling on his Samsung Galaxy. He was wearing that ridiculous black button-down shirt with the pub's Anchor logo embroidered in gold on the left breast. The thread always started to fray after a few washes. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounds normal in my memory. Just a tired student. "Think I can cut out early? I've got that anatomy exam." Dave glanced at the clock above the POS system. It was 11:15 p.m. "Yeah, go ahead. Close out your tab. Sarah can handle the two guys in the corner." I looked over at the corner booth. 2 regulars, old men in fishing gear, nursing pints of Alexander Keith's. They were not going anywhere. I nodded, feeling that wash of relief you get when you reclaim 45 minutes of your life. I spent the next 15 minutes performing the ritual of departure. I counted my tips, $42 in crinkled fives and loonies, smelling of copper and denim. I logged out of the Squirrel POS system, the screen responding with a satisfying beep as I punched in my server code, 8-8-2-1. I went to the back staff room, a cramped closet that smelled of wet coats and stale mop water, and swapped my black non-slip shoes for my street sneakers, a pair of worn-out New Balance. I put on my jacket. It was a dark green Columbia rain shell, the kind everyone in Nova Scotia owns. I zipped it up to my chin. I checked my pockets. Wallet, leather, stuffed with receipts, keys, Ford fob, apartment key, Dalhousie lanyard, and my phone. My iPhone 11 showed 14% battery. I made a mental note to plug it in the second I got into the car. "See you Thursday, Dave," I called out. "Drive safe." "Roads are slick," he mumbled, not looking up from his phone. I walked out the back door. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me with a mechanical thud that echoed in the alleyway. The transition from the warm, yeast-smelling air of the pub to the outside was violent. It was October in Halifax, about 8 degrees Celsius, with a fine, misty drizzle that was not quite rain but soaked you instantly. The air smelled of low tide, that sulphurous, rotting kelp smell mixed with the diesel fumes from the container ships idling in the harbor. I walked toward the employee parking lot. It was situated behind the building, a gravel patch squeezed between the pub and the edge of the waterfront boardwalk. The lighting was terrible. There were 2 sodium vapor streetlights, but one was flickering with a buzzing sound like an angry insect, casting intermittent orange strobes across the wet gravel. There were maybe 20 cars in the lot. Mine was parked in the back row, facing the water. A 2016 Ford Focus, silver, with a dent in the rear bumper from when I backed into a bollard during my first year. I walked with my head down, chin tucked into my collar to keep the mist off my neck. I heard the gravel crunching under my sneakers. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The rhythm was steady. I was not afraid. Why would I be? I was a 6-foot-tall male in a safe city. I was thinking about squid beaks and whether I had any frozen pizza left in the freezer at home. I reached the car. I remember pulling the keys out. I remember the cold, smooth plastic of the fob in my thumb. I remember pressing the unlock button. Chirp, chirp. The headlights flashed amber, illuminating the swirling mist for a split second. I grabbed the door handle. The metal was wet and freezing. I pulled it open. The interior light dome flickered on, revealing the cluttered passenger seat, a crumpled Tim Hortons bag, a textbook on marine ecology, and an empty water bottle. I sat down. The seat was cold through my jeans. I swung my legs in. I put the key in the ignition. And that is where the film cuts. There was no blow to the head. No sudden noise. No chloroform rag. Just the tactile sensation of the key sliding into the ignition cylinder, the resistance of the metal tumblers. And then the universe ceased to exist. I did not wake up. You wake up from sleep. This was more like being rebooted in safe mode. The first thing was the light. It was not the warm, yellow glow of my bedroom lamp. It was a harsh, aggressive fluorescent white that seemed to vibrate behind my eyelids. It hurt, felt like needles pushing into my optic nerves. Then came the smell. Not the harbor, not the pub. Sharp isopropyl alcohol, latex, bleach, and beneath that, the smell of soiled linen and fear. I tried to move my hand to shield my eyes, but my arm would not obey. It felt heavy, like it was encased in lead, and when I forced the muscle to contract, a sharp, tearing pain shot up my wrist. He's coming to. A voice. Female. Professional but bored. Check his vitals. Get DR. Eris on the page. I forced my eyes open. The world was a blur of beige and white. I blinked, trying to clear the mucus from my tear ducts. A face swam into view. A nurse wearing blue scrubs and a face mask. Her eyes were tired. Where? My voice was a croak. Felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. My throat was raw, stripped of moisture. Where am I? You at the QEII Health Sciences Center, the nurse said, her hands moving efficiently around the four-stand next to me. Halifax. You safe. QEII? The hospital? My brain tried to bridge the gap. I was just in the car. I was starting the Ford. Did I crash? Did I hit someone? I rasped. That was my first fear. I must have fallen asleep at the wheel. I must have hit a patch of black ice on the way home. The nurse paused. She looked at me, and for a second, her professional mask slipped. There was something in her eyes. Pity, maybe? Or disgust. No, honey, you did not crash. A doctor swept into the room a moment later. He was tall, balding, carrying a clipboard. He looked at the monitors, then at me. Mr. Thorne, he said. Welcome back. Can you tell me your full name and the date? Elias, I said. Elias Thorne. It is October 12th. Tuesday. The doctor pursed his lips. He made a note on his clipboard. The scratching of the pen sounded deafening in the quiet room. Elias, today is October 31st. Happy Halloween. The words did not make sense. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. I tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry cough that racked my ribs with agony. That's not funny, I whispered. It's not a joke, he said softly. He pulled a chair over and sat down. You were brought in 3 days ago on the 28th. You were found unconscious in Point Pleasant Park by a dog walker at 6:00 a.m. You've been in and out of consciousness since then, mostly unresponsive. 3 days ago, October 31st? I was just at the anchor, I insisted, my heart rate monitor beginning to beep faster. Beep, beep, beep. I clocked out at 11:30. I got in my car. We know, the doctor said. Police found your car in the employee lot on the morning of the 13th. It was unlocked. Keys in the ignition. Phone on the seat. I stared at the ceiling tiles. Counted the little perforations. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I counted them, I would not scream. What happened to me? I asked. The doctor hesitated. He exchanged a look with the nurse. Elias, your physical condition is complex. You've lost nearly 20 pounds. You are severely dehydrated and malnourished. He pulled the sheet back slightly to reveal my left arm. I looked, and then I wished I had not. My forearm was a map of violence. Deep, purple bruising wrapped around my wrist. Perfect, uniform bands about a half-inch wide. Restraint marks. Not rope. Plastic. Zip ties. There were healing abrasions where the skin had been rubbed raw against the restraints. But worse were the puncture marks. 3 of them, inside the elbow, surrounded by yellowing bruises. We found traces of ketamine and rohypnol in your toxicology screen, the doctor said, his voice clinical, detached. But there are other compounds we CA not identify. Synthetics. Sedatives that are not in the standard database. I looked at my legs under the thin hospital sheet. I could feel them now throbbing. And the doctor cleared his throat. There is significant tissue damage to your ankles as well, along with defensive wounds on your forearms and torso. The pattern of injuries suggests prolonged captivity. Prolonged captivity. The words hung in the sterilized air like a toxic gas. I do not remember, I said, tears leaking out of my eyes, hot and stinging. I do not remember anything. That's likely traumatic amnesia, he said. Your brain is protecting you. Protecting me? I looked at the zip tie scars on my wrist. If my brain was protecting me, why did I feel like I was currently falling down a bottomless well? The police did not come immediately. They waited until the doctors cleared me, which took another 6 hours of fluids and agonizing checks. By the time Detective Morrison and Detective Chun walked into my room, the sun had set outside the window. I could see the reflection of the room in the dark glass. A pale ghost in a hospital gown hooked up to tubes. Morrison was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, smelling of stale coffee and damp wool. He had the look of a man who had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. Chun was younger, sharper, with eyes that scanned the room like she was looking for a weapon. They did not introduce themselves with sympathy. They introduced themselves with badges and a notepad. Elias, Morrison started, pulling a chair too close to my bed. The plastic feet of the chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. Screet. We need to go over your statement again. From the beginning. I told the uniform officer, I said. My voice was stronger now thanks to the 4 fluids, but I still felt brittle. I clocked out. I walked to my car. I woke up here. Chun was standing at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. She was staring at my face, looking for a twitch, a tell. Elias, 16 days is a long time. People do not just vanish into thin air from a parking lot and reappear 3 weeks later with no memory unless there's a reason. A reason? I asked. You think I wanted this? We checked your financials, Morrison said, flipping a page in his notebook. You maxed out on your visa. Student loans piling up. You owe tuition for the winter term. I'm a student, I snapped. Everyone is broke. What does that have to do with anything? Sometimes, Chun said, her voice smooth. People get in over their heads. Maybe you owed money to someone? Maybe you were moving product through that pub? We know the anchor has had issues with dealers in the bathrooms before. I stared at them. The anger started in my stomach, hot and acidic. I bartend. I serve fish and chips. I do not sell drugs. Your car, Morrison interrupted. It was found unlocked. Keys in the ignition. Phone on the seat. Wallet in the glove box. No cash. So I was robbed, I said. Robbers take the wallet. They take the phone. They take the car, Morrison said. They do not leave everything behind and take you for 3 weeks, feed you expensive synthetic drugs, and then dump you in a park alive. He leaned in closer. I could smell the onion on his breath. The security footage from the pub. We pulled it. And it shows you walking to the car at 11:32 p.m. You get in. You close the door. Morrison tapped his pen on the notebook. Then, at 11:34 p.m., the camera feed cuts. Static. Snow. It stays down for exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it comes back online at 11:38 p.m., your car is there. The door is closed. But the thermal imaging from the Port Authority camera down the street suggests the car was empty. Someone hacked the camera? I asked. My skin crawled. The idea of someone watching, timing it, cutting the feed. Or, Chun said, someone who worked there knew where the blind spots were, knew how to cut the power to the transponder. You think I did this? I tried to sit up, but the pain in my ribs slammed me back down. Look at my wrists. Look at the toxicology report. We've seen self-inflicted injuries before, Elias, Morrison said, standing up. And we've seen kids take party drugs and lose a weekend. Ketamine can cause memory loss. Maybe you went on a bender? Maybe you met someone, went to a party, things got weird, you got tied up as part of whatever you re-into, and now you re-scared to tell your parents or the school. I want a lawyer, I said. The skepticism in their eyes was a physical weight. They did not see a victim. They saw a nuisance. They saw paperwork. We just trying to help you, son, Morrison said. But his tone said, we trying to close this file. Get out, I said. They left, leaving the door open. The hallway noise flooded in. Carts rattling, intercom pages, the distant moan of a patient in pain. I lay there in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the window again. My reflection stared back. But beyond my reflection, in the dark glass, I imagined I could see shapes. They were right about one thing. It was not a robbery. It was precise. The camera outage. The drugs. The restraints. I closed my eyes, trying to force a memory. The car door closing. The smell of the Tim Hortons bag. And then, a flash. Just a millisecond. Sound. A low, mechanical hum. Like a generator or a boat engine idling deep underwater. Smell. Diesel. And something else. Antiseptic? No. Formaldehyde. Touch. Cold metal against my naked back. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. The memory was gone as fast as it came, leaving only a residue of absolute primal terror. I was not alone in that void. I knew it. Someone had been there with me, watching, recording. And if the police would not believe me, I was the only one who could find out who they were. Returning to my apartment was a mistake. My roommate, Greg, tried to be cool about it, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I was the guy who brought the incident into our living room. He moved out in December. By April 2023, I was living alone in a bachelor apartment in the North End. I had dropped out of the semester. I could not focus on marine biology when the sound of water running in the sink made me break out in a cold sweat. I spent my nights online. I filed Freedom of Information requests. I trawled Reddit forums for Halifax disappearances. That's how I found Ryan. Ryan lived in Dartmouth with his parents. He had disappeared in February 2022. Found 3 weeks later. Same story. Memory loss. Restraint marks. Skeptical police. I went to see him on a Tuesday afternoon. His house was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the spring sun. Ryan was a shadow of a person. He sat in a recliner, wrapped in a heavy blanket despite the heat being cranked up to 25 degrees. They do not believe you, Ryan said. His voice was flat, dead. He did not look at me. He looked at the corner of the room. They think we junkies. I believe you, I said. I found the pattern. The cameras. They malfunctioned for you too, right? Ryan nodded slowly. The gap. The static. He pulled his sleeve up. His wrists were scarred, just like mine. I remember the water, Elias. Do you remember the water? No, I lied. I remembered the sound of water, the sloshing against a hull. I hear it at night. Ryan whispered, and I hear them. They talk about us. Like we not people. Like we components. Who? I do not know. The blurred faces. Ryan began to rock back and forth. They let us go, Elias. Why did they let us go? Maybe we escaped. Ryan laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. No, you do not escape that. They released us. We retag and release. Like fish. They re-studying us. I left Ryan's house shaking. I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every 10 seconds. That night, the paranoia set in properly. My apartment was on the second floor. It had a large window facing the street. I had covered it with thick blackout curtains, taped to the wall at the edges to prevent even a sliver of light from escaping. It was 2:00 a.m. The city was silent, save for the occasional distant siren. I was lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. My hearing had become hypersensitive since the return. I could hear the refrigerator compressor cycling on in the kitchen. I could hear the water moving in the pipes in the unit above me. Then I heard it. Click. The sound of a car door closing softly outside. Not a slam. A controlled latching. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I waited. Footsteps on the pavement. Slow. Deliberate. They were not the scuffing steps of a drunk walking home from the bars. These were heavy boots placing weight carefully. Crunch. Crunch. They stopped directly under my window. I could not breathe. My heart felt like a trapped bird battering against my ribcage. Thump, thump, thump. I rolled out of bed, sliding onto the floor. The hardwood was cold against my stomach. I crawled toward the window inch by inch like a soldier in a trench. My sweat smelled distinct, acrid chemically. The stress sweat. I reached the curtains. I found a tiny gap where the tape had peeled away. I put one eye to the hole. Down on the street, parked directly across from my building entrance, was a van. Dark blue. Ford Econoline. No windows in the back. No license plate on the front bumper. The street lamp glinted off the windshield. There was someone in the driver's seat. He was not looking at his phone. He was not looking at a map. He was looking up, directly at my window. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but I could see the silhouette. He was perfectly still. The statue. My phone vibrated on the floor behind me. I nearly screamed. I scrambled back, grabbed it. Unknown caller. I stared at the screen, the green button pulsing. Answer it. My thumb hovered. I pressed accept. I did not speak. I just listened. Silence. Then a sound. The sound. The low, mechanical hum of a generator. And the sound of water sloshing against metal. Who is this? I whispered. My voice was trembling so hard it barely registered. A voice came through the speaker. It was digital, distorted, but calm. Phase 2, it said. Then the line went dead. I scrambled back to the window. The van was gone. No engine noise. No tires squealing. It had just vanished into the fog, exactly like I had. The sun rose on April 19th, 2023, a weak, watery light that did little to dispel the oppressive darkness that had fallen over me during the night. The blackout curtains, usually my fortress, felt like a shroud. The sounds of Halifax waking up, garbage trucks rumbling, distant car horns, the chirping of sparrows nesting in the eaves of the old apartment building. All of it felt like a mockery. I had survived the night, but the terror had not receded. It had merely retreated to the edges of my vision, waiting. I moved through the apartment on autopilot. Shower. The hot water did little to warm the icy grip of fear that had settled in my core. The smell of the cheap motel soap I used, meant to be a clean, fresh scent, revolted me. It was too close to the antiseptic smell that had clung to my memory of the hospital. I dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a hoodie, ignoring the fact that it was a crisp spring morning. My fingers fumbled with the buttons on my jacket, the same Columbia shell I had worn that night at the pub nearly 6 months ago. I had not worn it since. The fabric felt wrong, cold and slick against my skin, a phantom echo of the October dampness. I needed to leave. Now, I grabbed my backpack, already packed with the essentials I'd been keeping ready. A change of clothes, my laptop, a small first aid kit, a bottle of water, and a protein bar. My keys, my wallet, my phone. I checked them twice. They were all there. As I moved towards the door, my gaze fell on the floor by the window. The blackout curtains, taped meticulously along the edges the night before, had a small, telltale gap. And beneath that gap, on the dusty hardwood, were faint, smudged footprints. Not mine. They were larger, wider, and the tread pattern was unusual, deep, almost like lug saws. They led from the window across the floor, and then stopped, as if whoever had been there had simply dematerialized. A wave of nausea washed over me. They had been inside. They had stood there, watching me. The digital voice, Phase 2, echoed in my mind. What was Phase 2? And why had they let me live through the night? I did not report it. What could I say? That a van appeared out of nowhere? That a distorted voice on the phone spoke of Phase 2? They laughed me out of the station. Morrison was retired. Chun was probably still looking for me to be a drug addict. They would not see the footprints. They would not understand the dread that was slowly crushing me. I left the apartment building and did not look back. I got into my car. A used Toyota Corolla I'd bought after the Focus was impounded and eventually crushed. This car was anonymous, unremarkable. It was my escape pod. I drove, not towards downtown, but west, towards the highway that led out of the city. I drove for 3 hours straight, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a gas station convenience store and the sheer terror of staying put. I listened to the radio, a station playing classic rock, the familiar songs a thin veneer over the gnawing anxiety. Bruce Springsteen singing about roads and freedom. I wanted freedom. I wanted to outrun the memory that was not a memory. By noon, I was 200 kilometers west of Halifax, pulled over at a rest stop near Bridgewater. The sun was higher now, warmer, but it still felt alien. I ate the protein bar, a chewy, bland thing tasting of artificial sweeteners and despair. I looked at my phone. No new calls, no new messages. Just the lingering unease. I thought about calling my parents in Cape Breton, but I knew what they would say. Come home, Elias. You're not safe there. They had begged me to return after I was released from the hospital, but I could not. Halifax was the site of the crime, the only place with any connection, however tenuous, to what had happened. Leaving felt like surrender, but now the city felt like a trap. I decided to go to the police. Not Halifax Regional Police. A smaller, local detachment. I needed to put something on record, even if it sounded insane. The Bridgewater detachment was small. A single-story brick building smelling of disinfectant and old paper. A young female officer with bright, curious eyes took my statement. I told her everything, trying to keep my voice even rational. The van, the footprints, the phone call, the feeling of being watched. She listened patiently, typing notes into her computer. So, Mr. Thorne, she said, looking up, her expression kind but clearly skeptical. You believe these individuals are connected to your disappearance last October? I do not know if they are, I admitted, my voice wavering. But the van looked similar to the description Eddie gave the police. Dark-colored, commercial. Eddie, a homeless man I spoke to. He thought he saw someone resembling me getting into a van near the casino around mid-October. The officer jotted it down. We'll file a report, Mr. Thorne, and I'll make a note to cross-reference it with any similar incidents in the area. But without a license plate or a clearer description. She trailed off, her meaning clear. It was a dead end. She handed me a printout. Case number B23 to 1047. You can call us if anything else comes to mind. I thanked her, a hollow gratitude. I walked out into the bright sunlight, feeling even more alone than before. Weeks turned into months. I stayed away from Halifax. I found a temporary job working in a small bookstore in Lunenburg, a quiet, picturesque fishing town. The salt air here was different, cleaner, bracing, untainted by the industrial stink of the big harbor. It still made me nervous, but the panic attacks were less frequent. I tried to rebuild my life. I enrolled in online courses to finish my degree remotely. I read textbooks, my fingers tracing the diagrams of plankton and crustaceans. But the knowledge felt hollow. It was like studying the blueprint of a house that had burned down. In late August 2024, I saw a small article buried on page 5 of the Chronicle Herald's online edition. Local man's death ruled suicide. The name at the top of the article sent a tremor through me that was colder than any ocean current. Ryan. The article was brief. Ryan's parents had found him in his room. The police had ruled it a suicide. There was a quote from his father, a man I vaguely remembered meeting, devastated and broken. He could not live with the not knowing anymore, the father had said. Not knowing. That phrase. It was a physical ache. It was the ghost in the machine. It was the empty space where 3 weeks of my life should have been. I sat there, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting in my tear-filled eyes. Ryan was gone. He had found a way out of the not knowing. The thought, dark and seductive, slithered into my mind. It would be so easy. No more fear. No more looking over my shoulder. No more wondering what horrors my subconscious was conjuring in the dark. But I was still here, still breathing, still feeling the phantom sensation of restraint marks on my wrists and ankles. The Halifax police officially closed my case in January 2024. Assault with an unknown perpetrator. Unsolved. Detective Morrison had retired to Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley, likely tending a small vineyard, oblivious to the quiet devastation he had left behind. The new detective assigned to cold cases likely filed my file under unlikely to be solved. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. The shaking had stopped. The void was still there, a gaping maw in my past, but it was no longer actively consuming me. It was a scar, permanent, chilling reminder of what had happened. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whoever had taken me was still out there. They were patient. They were methodical, and if they were capable of snatching me off a dark parking lot and holding me captive for weeks, they were capable of doing it again. The smell of salt water still made me feel ill. The sight of a dark van still made my pulse race. But I was no longer hiding. I had survived. I had escaped. And while the not knowing was a heavy burden, it was also a testament that I was still alive. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. For the first time in months, I did not feel the urge to immediately turn the lights on. I let the darkness settle around me. It was still cold, still vast, but it was no longer entirely terrifying. It was just empty, and for now that was enough. I would continue searching. I would continue living. Because even in the face of the unimaginable, the will to survive, the stubborn refusal to become just another statistic, was the strongest force of all.